Imagine you're part of a club. With some of the members you're friends, with others not so much. But you still have to talk to everyone and you don't want to miss out. This is what the G20, the Group of 20, basically is. A club with different members, 19 countries and the European Union. But what they all share is that they're the world's major economies and have to deal with a lot of problems.
Never has the task been greater for G20 leaders.
Russia's war against Ukraine is raging. Competition between two of the world's superpowers, China and the US, is picking up speed. Wildfires and floods have once again proven the climate emergency poses a big global threat.
G20 is more relevant today than ever before because the old institutions are dying.
Here's why the G20 club matters in today's world, maybe more than ever, and why it might still fail. To better understand, let's first take a look at how and why this club came about. So, who's part of the club? Just pause to see if your country is a member. Those countries cover some 2/3 of the global population. They represent the world's largest economies, with around 86% of the global GDP. But they are also responsible for 81% of global CO2 emissions. And when did it all start? The G20 club was formed in 1999 in the wake of the Southeast Asian financial crisis, as a forum for finance ministers and central bank governors. In 2008, the global financial crisis shook the world, and an upgrade was needed to deal with it. Since then, the G20 heads of state and government meet regularly. The G20 is not an international organization. There's no headquarters or even staff. And it has a rotating presidency. So you can imagine it kind of like a neighborhood club that meets up and discusses the latest issues. One member has a local business. The other might care about planting new trees. And another one fights over their land with the neighboring village. But in the end, everyone goes back home. It is a bit similar to how the G20 works, because summit decisions are non-binding. So why does the group actually exist?
Because it works, and because there really is nowhere else to go.
First, the G20's primary focus was on the economy and on global finance.
It's produced some great summits. The second one in London in 2009 really did solve the global financial crisis.
Since then, they expanded their range of topics, discussing issues such as trade, climate, and health. How successful the G20 really is, that's up for debate. In recent years, the climate movement has especially criticized G20 leaders for not doing enough against the climate crisis. And maybe you even remember these images: anti-globalization protests against G20 that sometimes turn violent. Experts say there is actually another reason why the G20 matters, but let's get back to that later. The G20 is a club with very different members, which can be an advantage, but also a risk. Because like in every club, there are smaller groups within the G20, and they all have their own interests. There's the G7, which some consider a more exclusive club. It already started in 1975, when the then most important industrial nations formed the Group of Seven. Germany is a part of it, as are Canada, France, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The European Union also participates in all meetings. They all share certain democratic values and represent the global north. But around 90% of the world's population is not part of this exclusive G7 club.
The G7 was compelled to create the G20 because they could not pull themselves out of the financial crisis in 2008. And so the G20 has appeared, but it has actually been a real blessing because it is a way for the old world to transition into a new world.
A more recent club that wants to shape this new world is the so-called BRICS, which formed in 2009, another club within the G20. In 2024, it will be joined by 6 more countries, 2 of them G20 members. So there are clearly 2 poles within the G20, which makes it more difficult to tackle today's challenges.
We can't solve these problems unless the countries of the so-called global north, with the G7 as their club, and the global south, represented largely by the BRICS, actually come together.
And on top of that, geopolitical rivals have to deal with each other in one forum. Democrats sit next to autocrats. The polarization within the G20 gets quite clear when you look at Russia. The country is part of the G20 club, despite its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. China and India, for example, continue to partner with Russia. Some other countries would have preferred to kick Russia out, like the G7 did after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. That shows how fragile the club sometimes is and how difficult it can be to find common ground. But analysts say belonging to the same club at least keeps the channels of communication open. And that might be the real reason why the G20 club is so important. It is a forum where leaders meet and have the chance to talk confidentially. For example, US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping met for the first time at the G20 in Bali, Indonesia, amid rising tensions over Taiwan.
The 20 is just small enough where leaders can look each other in the eye and be real leaders.
And this is what makes the G20 different from other international bodies such as the UN, the United Nations, with 193 member states.
Because the UN is not an effective body anymore, it is unable to serve the world. The G20 more than ever is now seen to be that body. So a lot of the UN issues have suddenly become G20 issues.
In the UN General Assembly, it tends to be a place where people read speeches at each other rather than talk to each other.
But clearly, not everyone is part of the G20 club. In fact, a considerable portion of the world is not. South Africa is the only G20 member from the African continent. So, who gets a seat at the table? Since its beginnings, the G20's composition hasn't changed. Up to now, there have been no formal criteria for membership, but all members are important players in the global economy. From an outside perspective, it might not really make sense that Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, is not part of the G20. But this could change soon, because some G20 powers have called for the African Union to join the club. That's almost the entire continent.
The biggest success is going to be the inclusion of the African Union in the G20. I think that is absolutely in everybody's interest.
We'll have to see if the African Union gets added as a G20 member at the Delhi summit, and it'll make people feel good. Oh yeah, we're doing more for Africa. But will it actually improve the performance of the G20?
So where's the G20 heading? With all the crises looming, there is a need for international cooperation. The G20 finds itself at a crossroads. While the G7 club is becoming less influential, the countries of the global south also want to shape the global agenda.
India is emerging, Indonesia is emerging, Africa is emerging, South America is emerging, Asia is emerging. Our time is yet to come.
The question is, how can the different clubs within G20 work together despite their differences? Tell us what you think.